Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
The courthouse clock tower struck 3 in the afternoon as Michelle Parker set down her pen, watching the ink dry on documents that would forever change the course of her existence. The ballpoint had felt heavy in her fingers, weighted not with reluctance, but with the profound gravity of liberation. Around her, the sterile walls of the family court seemed to exhale, as if the building itself understood the significance of this moment. Gordon Parker sat across from her, his jaw clenched in that familiar way that had once made her stomach twist with anxiety. But today, his anger felt powerless against the shield of her newfound resolve. His sharp gray suit, perfectly pressed and intimidating, could no longer diminish the light that had begun to flicker back to life within her chest. 12 years, Michelle, he said, his voice carrying that controlled venom she knew so well. 12 years, and this is how you repay everything I've given you. The old Michelle would have flinched, would have apologized, would have second-guessed her decision. But the woman who sat there that autumn afternoon had been reborn through months of therapy, self-reflection, and the gradual recognition that love should never feel like imprisonment. She met his gaze with steady brown eyes that had learned to see their own worth. What you gave me, Gordon, she replied quietly, was a cage painted to look like a home. The lawyer cleared his throat, shuffling papers with practiced efficiency. But Michelle barely heard the procedural discussions that followed. Her mind was already elsewhere, already imagining the small apartment she had rented across town, with its sunlit kitchen and the easel she planned to set up by the window. At 34, she felt both ancient and newborn, carrying the wisdom of hard-earned lessons and the excitement of unlimited possibilities. As they left the courthouse, Gordon's parting words followed her like a cold wind. You'll never make it on your own, Michelle. You'll come crawling back within 6 months. But his prediction fell on deaf ears. Michelle Parker had already begun, walking toward a future she was only just learning to envision. 3 weeks into her new life, Michelle discovered that freedom had its own unique rhythm. Her days were no longer dictated by Gordon's schedule, his preferences, his moods. Instead, they flowed like water finding its natural course, sometimes rushing with energy, sometimes pooling in moments of peaceful reflection. She had taken a part-time job at the local coffee shop, grounded, not out of financial desperation, but from a desire to be among people again, to remember how it felt to smile without calculating the consequences. The morning regulars had begun to recognize her, greeting her with the casual warmth that comes from shared routine. It was on a Tuesday morning, as she arranged fresh pastries in the display case, that her eyes fell upon the missing person flyer taped to the front window. The face looking back at her was striking in its intensity, a woman with intelligent hazel eyes and auburn hair that caught light like copper wire. The text was simple but haunting. Missing, Emily Bell, age 29, last seen October 12th near Riverside Park. If you have any information, please contact Harper Bell at... Something about the photograph held Michelle's attention longer than seemed reasonable. Perhaps it was the way Emily's smile seemed to hide secrets, or the defiant tilt of her chin that spoke of someone who refused to be diminished by the world's expectations. Michelle found herself studying the image throughout the morning, feeling an inexplicable connection to this stranger whose absence had become a presence in their small town. The bell above the door chimed, and Michelle looked up to see a woman, entering with purposeful strides. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a leather jacket that suggested someone accustomed to taking action rather than waiting for others to act. But it was her eyes that made Michelle's breath catch, the same intelligent hazel as the woman in the photograph, though shadowed with worry and determination. "Excuse me," the woman said, approaching the counter. "I'm Harper Bell," I put up. "That missing person flyer in your window about my sister, Emily." Michelle's heart began to beat faster, though she couldn't have explained why. "Of course, I was just looking at it. I'm so sorry about your sister. Is there anything I can do to help?" Harper's expression softened slightly, as if Michelle's genuine concern had eased some burden she'd been carrying alone. Most people just glance and move on. "But you've been staring at that photo all morning. Did you know, Emily?" "No," Michelle admitted, feeling suddenly foolish. I don't know why, but something about her face ... it just stayed with me. Maybe it's because I'm a journalist. Well, I was a journalist before. She trailed off, realizing she'd been about to explain her entire life story to a stranger. Before what? Harper asked, her investigative instincts apparently as sharp as her sister's eyes. Michelle hesitated, then found herself speaking with surprising honesty. Before I got married and forgot who I was, I'm just starting to remember. Something shifted in Harper's expression, a recognition that passed between them like an electric current. Emily always said that the most dangerous prisons are the ones we don't recognize as cages. The words hit Michelle with unexpected force, as if Emily Bell had somehow reached across the void of her disappearance to speak directly to her heart. She sounds like a wise woman. She is, Harper said firmly, the present tense deliberate and fierce, and I'm going to find her. Without quite understanding what drove her to speak, Michelle heard herself saying, maybe I could help. I might be rusty, but I still remember how to investigate a story. Harper studied her for a long moment, and Michelle felt as though she was being evaluated not just as a potential ally, but as a person worth knowing. The sensation was both thrilling and terrifying. When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen capabilities rather than limitations? Meet me tomorrow at 7, Harper said finally. Riverside Park, where Emily was last seen. Bring whatever journalistic instincts you think you might have left. As Harper turned to leave, she paused at the door. And Michelle? Thank you for seeing her face, really seeing it. Most people look right through the missing, as if they were never really there at all. After she left, Michelle stood in the empty coffee shop, staring at Emily's photograph with new understanding. She wasn't just looking at a missing person poster anymore. She was looking at the beginning of her own transformation, though she didn't yet know how profound that change would be. Riverside Park at 7 in the evening felt like a place caught between worlds. The autumn sun hung low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and gold, while shadows stretched, long and dark between the trees. Michelle arrived 5 minutes early, her old reporter's notebook clutched in her hands like a talisman from her former life. Harper was already there, standing at the edge of the path where it curved toward the river. She had changed from her morning leather jacket into a dark sweater that made her seem to blend with the approaching twilight. When she saw Michelle approaching, she offered a small smile that managed to be both grateful and guarded. I wasn't sure you'd come, Harper admitted. I wasn't sure I would either, Michelle replied honestly. But I keep thinking about what you said about the most dangerous prisons being the ones we don't recognize. I spent 12 years in one of those prisons. If I can help find your sister, maybe I can prove to myself that I'm really free. Harper nodded, understanding passing. Between them without need for further explanation, Emily was walking home from her evening jog. She took this route every Tuesday and Thursday, had done it for months. Very predictable, very safe, or so we thought. They began walking along the path, Harper pointing out the specific locations where Emily's routine had taken her. The park was peaceful but not deserted. Other joggers passed them, dog walkers nodded in greeting, and a group of teenagers had gathered near the playground. It didn't feel like the kind of place where someone simply vanished. The police said there were no signs of struggle. Harper continued, her voice tight with frustration. No witnesses, no security cameras in this section of the park. Emily just disappeared somewhere between the footbridge and the parking area. Michelle scribbled notes, her journalistic instincts stirring to life like muscles, remembering their purpose after a long period of disuse. What was Emily's state of mind in the weeks before she went missing? Any problems at work, relationship issues, financial stress? Harper stopped walking, turning to face Michelle directly. That's what I need to tell you. Emily wasn't just a missing person, Michelle. She was investigating something. Something that might have gotten her in trouble with very dangerous people. The evening air seemed to grow colder around them. Michelle felt a familiar chill of excitement mixed with apprehension, the sensation that always came when a story began to reveal its deeper currents. What kind of investigation? Emily worked as a freelance journalist, specializing in financial crime. In the months before she disappeared, she'd been looking into a series of suspicious deaths, all wealthy individuals who had died under circumstances that seemed convenient for certain other parties. Emily believed there was a pattern, possibly even a network of people who were arranging these deaths to look like accidents or suicides. Michelle's pen stopped moving across her notebook. A cold understanding began to creep up her spine. Harper, did Emily ever mention the name Gordon Parker? The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they wanted to cross. Harper's eyes narrowed, studying Michelle's face with new intensity. How do you know that name? Michelle's mouth went dry. Gordon Parker is my ex-husband. I just signed divorce papers 3 weeks ago. The silence that followed felt charged with electricity. Around them, the normal sounds of the park, birds settling for the night, distant traffic, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, seemed muffled, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Michelle, Harper said slowly, Gordon Parker, was one of the names in Emily's notes. She believed he might be connected to at least 3 of the suspicious deaths she was investigating. The ground seemed to shift beneath Michelle's feet. All those years of marriage, all those business trips Gordon had taken, all those phone calls he'd stepped outside to take, all those times she'd felt like she was living with a stranger, suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. I need to see those notes, Michelle whispered. Harper nodded grimly. And I need to know everything you can tell me about your ex-husband. Everything, Michelle. Our lives might depend on it. As they walked back through the deepening darkness, Michelle realized that signing those divorce papers had been only the first step in her liberation. The real journey toward freedom and toward understanding the truth about the man she'd been married to for 12 years was just beginning. And somewhere in the shadows of that realization, she became aware of something else. The way Harper's hand had briefly touched her arm when she'd shared the news about Gordon. The way her heart had responded to that simple contact. The way everything about this investigation felt like awakening to possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. Harper's apartment was nothing like what Michelle had expected. Instead of the sparse, utilitarian space she'd imagined for a woman on a mission, she found herself in a warm, book-filled sanctuary that spoke of someone who believed in creating beauty even in the midst of crisis. Plants cascaded from shelves. Soft lamps cast golden pools of light, and the walls were covered with photographs that told stories of adventures and friendships and a life lived fully. Emily helped me decorate this place, Harper said, noticing Michelle's appreciative gaze. She always said that our surroundings should reflect our souls, not our circumstances. She led Michelle to a large dining room table that had been transformed into a makeshift investigation headquarters. Newspaper clippings, printed internet articles, photographs, and handwritten notes covered every inch of the surface, connected by red string in a complex web that made Michelle's journalist heart race with recognition and excitement. This is Emily's work, Harper said, gesturing to the sprawling collection. 3 months of research into what she called the convenient deaths, 7 wealthy individuals, all deceased within the past 2 years, all deaths ruled accidental or suicide, all leaving behind financial situations that benefited very specific people. Michelle leaned in, studying the photographs of the deceased. They were a varied group, men and women, ranging in age from their 40s to their 70s, from different parts of the country. But as she read Emily's meticulous notes, a pattern began to emerge. They were all involved in legal disputes, Michelle observed. Divorce proceedings, business partnerships gone sour, inheritance battles, ... And in every case, Harper continued, their deaths resolved those disputes in favor of the surviving party. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Michelle's hands trembled slightly as she picked up a photograph of Gordon, taken from some business magazine article. Emily's notes in the margin were extensive and damning. G. Parker, 3 wives, all wealthy at time of marriage. First wife died in car accident after filing for divorce. Second wife overdose, ruled suicide during divorce proceedings. Third wife, current, showing signs of financial abuse and isolation. The room seemed to spin around Michelle as she read those words. Harper, I was the 3rd wife, and Gordon ... Gordon tried to get me to change my will just 2 months before I filed for divorce. Harper went very still. What kind of changes? He wanted me to remove my sister's beneficiary and leave everything to him. He said it was because married couples should prioritize each other. I thought it was strange, but I was so used to doing what he wanted without questioning. Thank God you didn't sign it. Michelle sank into one of Harper's chairs, the full implications crashing over her like a wave. Harper, I think Gordon was planning to kill me. The words hung in the air between them, stark and terrifying. Harper moved to Michelle's side, her hand coming to rest gently on Michelle's shoulder. The touch was meant to comfort, but it sent an unexpected warmth through Michelle's body, a reminder that human connection could be gentle, chosen, healing. You're safe now, Harper said softly. You got out in time, but Emily. Michelle looked up at Harper, seeing her own fear reflected in those hazel eyes. Emily was investigating Gordon, and now she's missing. Harper nodded grimly, which means she got too close to something someone didn't want exposed. The question is, how do we find her without ending up like her? Michelle stood up, pacing to the window that looked out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Emily Bell might be alive, might be trapped, might be waiting for rescue. And somewhere out there, Gordon Parker was continuing whatever deadly game he'd been playing for years. We need help, Michelle said finally. Someone with resources, with connections. Someone who can investigate Gordon without tipping him off. Emily mentioned a detective, Harper said, rifling through the papers. Someone who'd been asking questions about the pattern of deaths, but couldn't get official support for a broader investigation. Detective Sarah Chen. As Harper searched for Detective Chen's contact information, Michelle found herself studying her movements, the graceful efficiency of her hands, the determined set of her shoulders, the way her hair caught the lamplight. When had she started noticing such things about women? When had Harper's presence begun to feel like sanctuary and excitement all at once? Found it, Harper said, holding up a business card. We'll call her tomorrow. Michelle? Yes. Thank you for being here, for believing Emily's story, for risking your own safety to help find her. Their eyes met across the room, and Michelle felt something shift between them, something that had been building since their first meeting at the coffee shop. It was attraction, yes, but deeper than that. Recognition, understanding, the sense of two souls discovering they spoke the same language. Harper, Michelle said quietly, I need you to know something. These feelings I'm having about you, about us, they're completely new to me. I don't know what they mean, and I don't know where they're leading. Harper smiled, expression both tender and knowing. Emily always said that the best adventures begin when we stop trying to control the destination and start trusting the journey. Michelle felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from fear, relief, or the overwhelming sensation of being truly seen, she couldn't say. I've spent so many years being afraid of my own feelings. Afraid of Gordon's reaction, afraid of judgment, afraid of being wrong. And now? Michelle looked at Harper, really looked at her, taking in the strength and kindness and fierce intelligence that radiated from every part of her being. Now I'm still afraid, but I'm more afraid of missing out on something real because I'm too scared to find out what it might be. Harper crossed the room, stopping just close enough that Michelle could feel the warmth of her presence. Then let's find Emily first. And after we bring her home safely, let's see what kind of adventure we might discover together. In that moment, surrounded by evidence of deadly conspiracies and dangerous secrets, Michelle Parker felt more alive than she had in 12 years. The investigation would be perilous. The attraction to Harper was uncharted territory, and Gordon's potential for violence was a shadow that would follow them both. But for the first time in her adult life, Michelle was choosing her own path forward. And that choice, terrifying as it was, felt like the most important decision she had ever made. Detective Sarah Chen's office was a steady and controlled chaos, much like the woman herself. Files stacked in precise towers covered every available surface. Crime scene photographs were pinned to corkboards with military precision and a complex timeline stretched across one entire wall. When Michelle and Harper arrived at the precinct the following morning, Chen greeted them with the weary intensity of someone who had been carrying too many unsolved cases for too long. I've been expecting this call, Chen said without preamble, gesturing for them to sit in the two chairs facing her desk. She was a small woman in her early 40s, with silver threading through her black hair and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of their appearance. Emily Bell contacted me 6 weeks before she disappeared. She had theories about a network of arranged deaths that aligned perfectly with suspicions I'd been developing independently. Harper leaned forward. Why wasn't there an official investigation? Chun's laugh was bitter. Try convincing your superiors to investigate a conspiracy involving wealthy, influential people based on circumstantial evidence and pattern recognition. The brass wanted concrete proof, eyewitness testimony, forensic evidence that could stand up in court. What Emily and I had were suspicions and statistical anomalies. Michelle pulled out her notebook, her journalistic instincts fully engaged. Now, but you believed her? I believe the evidence. 7 deaths, all conveniently timed, all benefiting specific parties in ongoing legal disputes. The odds against that being coincidence are astronomical. Chen pulled a file from one of her stacks, but Emily was getting close to something that made someone very nervous. Her phone calls to me became increasingly urgent in the weeks before. She disappeared. What did she discover? Harper asked. Chen opened the file, revealing photographs and documents that made Michelle's blood run cold. At the center was a surveillance photo of Gordon Parker shaking hands with a man Michelle didn't recognize, taken outside an upscale restaurant downtown. Emily had been tracking your ex-husband's movements, Chen told Michelle. She discovered he'd been meeting regularly with Marcus Webb, a private investigator with connections to some very questionable people. Webb specializes in what he calls problem solving for wealthy clients. Michelle stared at the photograph, seeing Gordon's face in profile, his expression animated as he spoke to Webb. How many nights had he come home late, claiming to have been at business dinners or client meetings? How many times had she accepted his explanations without question? Emily believed Webb was the connection between all 7 deaths, Chen continued. He arranges accidents, suicides, overdoses, whatever method seems most plausible given the victim's circumstances. Gordon Parker wasn't just a client. Emily thought he might be a partner in the operation. Harper's face had gone pale. That means Emily discovered a murder conspiracy, and now she's missing. I'm afraid it's worse than that, Chen said quietly. 2 days ago, we found Emily's car in a lake about 50 miles north of here. It was staged to look like she'd driven off. The road in bad weather, but the forensics don't add up. There were no skid marks, no signs of an attempt to brake or steer away from the water. The world seemed to tilt around Michelle. Harper made a small sound of pain, her hand clutching the arm of her chair until her knuckles went white. But you said staged, Michelle managed to say. That means it means someone wanted us to think Emily was dead without actually producing a body, Chen confirmed, which suggests she might still be alive, though probably not by choice. Harper stood abruptly, beginning to pace the small office. They're holding her somewhere, using her as leverage or trying to get information from her. That's my theory as well, Chen agreed. The question is where and how long we have before they decide she's no longer useful to them alive. Michelle felt the familiar surge of determination that had once driven her best investigative work. What do you need from us, detective? How can we help find her? Chen studied them both carefully. What I'm about to suggest is dangerous and completely outside proper procedure. If we're wrong, you could both end up dead. If we're right, but we make mistakes, Emily dies and this conspiracy continues claiming victims. Tell us, Harper said firmly. We need to make Gordon and Webb think that Emily shared her information with others before she disappeared. We need them to believe that killing her won't contain the story, that more investigation will only bring more attention to their operation. Michelle understood immediately. You want us to bait them out into the open. I want Michelle to contact Gordon. Directly, Chen said. Tell him that Emily reached out to you before she disappeared, shared some of her research, expressed concerns about his involvement in something illegal. Make him think you know more than you do. Absolutely not, Harper said, her voice sharp. With fear, Michelle barely escaped him once. We're not putting her back in his crosshairs. But Michelle was already shaking her head. Harper, this might be the only way to find Emily. And Chun is right. If we don't stop them, they'll keep killing people. Michelle, Harper's voice broke slightly. I just found you. I can't lose you too. The raw emotion in Harper's words hit Michelle like a physical blow. In that moment, she realized that what had been growing between them was more than attraction, more than the excitement of new possibilities. It was love, fragile and unexpected, but real enough to risk everything for. Michelle reached out, taking Harper's hand in hers. You're not going to lose me. We're going to find Emily, stop Gordon and Webb, and then we're going to have that adventure you mentioned. But first, we have to be brave enough to face the danger. Harper squeezed her fingers tightly. Then we do this together. Every step, every risk, every decision. I'm not letting you face Gordon alone. Chun nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Because the plan I have in mind is going to require both of you to be convincing actors and very, very careful operators. As Chun began outlining the details of their operation, Michelle felt the same sensation she'd experienced when signing the divorce papers, the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of stepping into an unknown future. But this time she wasn't stepping alone. Harper's hand remained in hers, warm and strong and steady, anchoring her to the present moment while they planned for whatever tomorrow might bring. The investigation had become something more than a search for a missing person. It had become a battle for justice, for truth, and for the right to choose love over fear. Michelle Parker, who had spent 12 years being controlled by a man she now knew was a killer, was finally ready to take control of her own story. And this time, she was going to write an ending worth believing in. The plan was set in motion. On a Thursday evening that felt heavy with approaching storm clouds, Michelle sat in her car outside Gordon's office building, hands trembling as she reviewed the script she and Detective Chun had carefully crafted. Through her earpiece, she could hear Harper's voice providing quiet encouragement. "Remember, you're not the same woman who lived in fear of him," Harper whispered. "You're stronger now. You know the truth." Michelle took a deep breath, stepped out of her car, and walked into the building that had once felt like enemy territory. Gordon's law firm occupied the top 3 floors, all glass and chrome, and the kind of aggressive masculinity that had once intimidated her into silence. But tonight she moved through the lobby with purpose, her spine straight and her resolve unwavering. Gordon was waiting in his office, having agreed to meet under the pretense of finalizing some financial details from their divorce. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, his reflection ghostly in the glass. When he turned to face her, Michelle saw something new in his expression, a wariness that hadn't been there during their marriage. "Michelle," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "you look different." "I feel different," she replied, settling into the chair across from his desk without waiting for invitation. The old Michelle would have remained standing until he gave permission. Freedom tends to change a person. Gordon's eyes narrowed slightly. "What did you want to discuss?" Michelle opened the folder she'd brought, pulling out copies of Emily's research that Chen had provided. She arranged them on Gordon's desk with deliberate care, watching his face as he recognized the photographs and documents. "A woman named Emily Bell contacted me a few days before she disappeared," Michelle said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She had some very interesting theories about certain patterns in recent deaths of wealthy individuals. Your name came up quite frequently in her research. Gordon's stillness was absolute, but Michelle had learned to read the micro-expressions he couldn't control, the tightening around his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw. He was afraid and trying very hard not to show it. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said finally. "Really? Then you don't know Marcus Webb? You've never met with him to discuss problem-solving for difficult legal situations?" She slid the surveillance photograph across the desk, the image of Gordon and Webb shaking hands clearly visible. Gordon glanced at it, and Michelle saw the moment he realized the game had changed. "You have no idea what you're meddling with, Michelle," he said, his voice dropping to the low, dangerous tone that had once sent her scurrying for safety. Emily Bell was a delusional woman who created conspiracy theories out of coincidences. Her disappearance has nothing to do with me. "Then you won't mind if Detective Chen reopens the investigations into your first 2 wives' deaths," Michelle said calmly. "I'm sure the authorities would be fascinated to hear about your recent attempts to change my will, especially given the patterns Emily documented." Gordon stood abruptly, beginning to pace behind his desk. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've figured something out?" "You have no proof of anything, Michelle. Just the paranoid fantasies of a missing woman and your own desperate need to justify walking away from everything I gave you." "What you gave me was 12 years of control and isolation," Michelle replied. "What I gave myself was the courage to leave before you could add me to Marcus Webb's list of problems solved." The mask finally slipped. Gordon's face contorted with rage and something darker, the cold calculation of a man who had killed before and was prepared to kill again. "You stupid bitch," he snarled. "You have no idea what you've just done." In that moment, Michelle heard Harper's voice in her earpiece. He's admitting to it. Jen has everything she needs. "Get out now." But Gordon was already moving around his desk, his hand reaching into his jacket. Michelle saw the glint of metal and felt time slow around her as she realized he was armed, that Detective Chen's plan had worked too well, that Gordon was past caring about maintaining his cover. The office door burst open and Harper charged in, followed immediately by Detective Chen and 2 uniformed officers. Gordon spun toward them, his gun half-drawn, his face a mask of fury and desperation. "Drop the weapon," Chen shouted, her own service pistol trained on Gordon. "It's over, Parker." We have recordings of everything you just said, and we have Webb in custody. He's already talking. Gordon's eyes darted between the officers and Michelle, calculation and rage warring in his expression. For a terrifying moment, Michelle thought he might shoot anyway, might decide that if he was going down, he would take her with him. But then his shoulders sagged, the fight going out of him as he realized the impossibility of his situation. He dropped the gun, raising, his hands in surrender as the officers moved to arrest him. "Where's Emily Bell?" Chun demanded as they cuffed him. Gordon's last look was directed at Michelle, filled with such venom that she felt Harper step protectively closer to her side. "Ask Webb," he said finally. "He likes to keep trophies of his successes." As they led Gordon away, Michelle felt her knees buckle. All the adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation suddenly drained away, leaving her shaking and hollow. Harper's arms came around her immediately, strong and warm and infinitely reassuring. "It's over," Harper whispered against her hair. "You did it, Michelle. You were incredible." But Michelle was thinking about Emily, still missing, still in danger somewhere. "This isn't over until we find your sister." Detective Chen approached them, her expression grim but determined. "Webb's being interrogated now. If Emily's alive, we'll find her. You two should go home, get some rest. You've done more than enough." As they left the office building together, Michelle looked up at the storm clouds that had been gathering all evening. The first drops of rain were beginning to fall, washing the city clean, preparing the ground for whatever would grow next. "Harper," she said as they reached their cars, "when this is really over, when Emily is safe and the trials are finished and the headlines have faded, what happens to us?" Harper smiled, the expression transforming her face from merely beautiful to radiant. "Then we find out what it feels like to fall in love without looking over our shoulders. We discover who we are when we're not defined by crisis or danger or other people's expectations." Michelle felt tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." They stood there in the growing storm, holding hands in the space between Michelle's old life and whatever came next, between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. The investigation would continue. Emily's fate remained uncertain, and the legal battles were just beginning. But Michelle Parker was finally truly free. And for the first time in 12 years, the future felt like something to embrace rather than endure. The storm broke over the city that night, washing away the last remnants of fear and control, preparing the ground for love to take root and grow.